Or good morning, those of you who are sitting there waiting on the stream. Good morning. Thanks to be a part of the show. I think I'm going to be moving almost exclusively to the stream here before too much longer. I have a health show for you today, and I think it's going to be pretty good. Talking about a lot of different subjects. I'll try to get through them quickly because there's 4 of them that I want to cover. And the latest stuff in seed oils that's out there, and just, my goodness, how it is killing everybody left and right. And the fraud that's involved. The fraud with it is, as far as I'm concerned, is as big as the fraud that was concerned with the COVID vaccines. I want to get to that. I want to get to killing chickens, why they continue to kill chickens needlessly, violating the laws of Mother Nature. I want to talk about statins, some of the latest stuff out on statins now, which is killing people as well, and just how the marketplace has taken over healthcare rather than science. And science is kind of going out the window. So let me turn that down, and there we go. So I'll just plow into this as quickly as I can. I made the comment that I probably are going to be going exclusively to streaming instead of live at K-Talk. I think the audience is dwindling. Because of all the kinds of interruptions that occur. I was talking to Robin yesterday, and he was mentioning that when you're not there, people go somewhere else. And they may go somewhere else for a day or two, and then they come back, and then you're not there again, and then so they go somewhere else and stay there. I suppose if I were doing the program live from the radio station in Linden, very low volume. I don't know why, Paul. I don't know why. It's because I called in on Zara. I could not, when I was connected with Zoom, I was not broadcasting. So I cut off Zoom and went into Zara. So maybe the volume is low because of Zara. If you can hear me, Paul, do you think I should try and reconnect with Zoom? See, this is why I'm thinking of going exclusively to stream. Kristen, who helps to manage the station as best she can, suggested that I pre-record some stuff and send it in as a pre-recorded show instead of live on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesdays, because the broadcast is much better, and the sound is better, and there's a lot less interruptions. So I am going to look into that this week, the possibility of doing that, because and then as far as the stream is concerned, I don't want to do these 2-hour streams. Who listens to a 2-hour stream? I mean, if you're Joe Rogan, it's different. But I'd like to break it up in several smaller 20, 25-minute pieces and then devote those pieces to a particular topic. I think that would be much better. Of course, it would require more time to do this, but then what else do we have in life anymore but time? And the moment, the now. You don't have the future. You better stop worrying about the past. You just have the now. You just have this moment to deal with. So, Paul, if you could let me know if I should disconnect and try coming back in on Zoom, it might make a difference in volume. But as you know, I cannot control the volume. Or at least I don't think I can control volume. All right. So let's get started here. This wasn't in the title because although I noticed that I'm having less and less of my programs up at YouTube being taken down. So maybe something's happened as far as I am on Zara, Paul. I am on Zara. I couldn't, it didn't seem like I could connect with Zoom, so I connected with Zara, and that's what I'm connected to now. No, I can disconnect. I can disconnect and come back in on, try Zoom again, or you can go into Zoom and call me, and we'll see if that works. But I want you to be able to hear what I have. I want you to hear the program today, because I don't know how many more of these I'm going to do, to tell you the truth. And a thing about Jack's Packs. Jack's Packs are starting to move, thank goodness. I've put a lot of time and attention to these things, mostly for the heart. Did another scan on somebody who is way too young to be having bad heart function. And they did not get the vax, so by their admission, they did not get it. So what is causing this increase? And we see it even in non-vaxxed people, endocarditis. Okay, Paul. All right, so let me go on here. The COVID vaccines, and I think the vaccine industry has been worried about this ever since Bobby Jr. got in there, could be suspended for all age groups, the COVID, not all vaccines, just the COVID, under this radical new plan that's backed by some of the key health figures in the Trump administration. Several experts have were poised for top jobs in the agencies to the disputed idea that the shots are causing widespread side effects and deaths. So Dr. J. Bhattacharya, Bhattacharya, has been nominated to lead the NIH, and he has backed a petition calling for the mRNA vaccines to be paused and retested for safety. And he's one of the signatories of the New Hope Accord, which claims there is a causal link between the mRNA shots and an alarming rise in excess deaths worldwide. So DailyMail.com also understands Bobby Kennedy has privately expressed concerns about the vaccines and signaled he is open to axing them if the data supports it. Now, how do you stop this? How do you just stop a vaccine? Well, you pull the authorization. You pull the safety authorization. The COVID vaccines are still working under, being promoted under an emergency. Well, you just pull the emergency. So some key advisors to Kennedy have promoted the view about COVID vaccines, including that the shots actually have killed more people than it saved. Now, of course, that's rather controversial out there. Dr. Aseem Malhotra, who was just recently on Joe Rogan, who's a British cardiologist, being considered for a health advisory role in Biden's health departments, Kennedy, has called for the jabs to be suspended and reassessed altogether for safety. Outside the health agencies, you've got Kash Patel, who's been nominated, well, not nominated, he's been approved now as the FBI director, previously was promoting certain supplements that reverse the supposed damage caused by COVID vaccines. The Daily Mail is referencing, and this is a recent thing, the British, the UK publication, a post by Kash Patel on Truth Social back in February where he shared a link to a supplement company that offers a spike supplement bundle, which, contrary to mainstream pharma, includes scientifically supported ingredients such as proteolytic enzymes to break down the spike protein. Your director of the FBI was promoting that a month ago. Well, congratulations, Kash. I've been promoting that for 3 years with my enzymes, very powerful proteolytic enzymes. And when you're dealing with enzymes that destroy proteins, break them up into amino acids, and you're dealing with very powerful enzymes, like the ones I have in mine, then these enzymes are designed to rip proteins to pieces quickly. You can't just say, well, it only targets this kind of a protein, or it only targets that kind of a protein. Except maybe you could argue that about pepsin that is released in the stomach wall. Pepsin has one primary target. Although it will chew up other things, its primary target, of course is collagen. And collagen is only found in meat. You don't find collagen outside of animal products. So it's interesting that Mother Nature built that enzyme into human physiology that only has one target, animal flesh. However, in the enzymes that I put together, and this is just an aside, this wasn't the main thing I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about a ban on the vaccines that they're talking about in the NIH now. Is that whenever people come into my clinic asking for, what do we do about the spike protein? It's right here. It's been, I was just looking at some of the earlier development that we had performed for this product 10 years ago. This product's been on the market for 10 years now, along with our ageless thyroid. And it just thrills my heart every day when people come in there, and every day someone's buying enzymes, somebody's buying ageless thyroid. Because it works, so they keep coming back to get it. They get the ageless thyroid because it calms down their hormonal system. It brings some peace and stability to what's called the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the thyroid, and the adrenal ball team, how they work together like the infield of a Major League Baseball team. And it feeds and supports these organs so that we can get back to a more calm basis for decision-making and emotional relationships with other people. And every time I see the staff reaching up on the counter to pull down another bottle of ageless thyroid, I'm thinking, we're helping people. We're helping people out there. Now, during his first term, Trump spearheaded the development of the shots in record time, which was at the time widely regarded as a medical breakthrough. And the mRNA vaccines made by Moderna and Pfizer are estimated, mind you, to have saved tens of millions of lives globally, including 3 million people in the United States. Now that's an estimation. An estimation is not a fact. And these vaccine manufacturers still say it saved tens of millions of people around the world, 3 million people in America, by their estimate. Just show the data. Show me the data that proves that it saved 3 million people in America, and I'll proudly talk about it on my radio show. But short of that, estimations are not facts. So President Trump has been reluctant ever since then to take credit for the achievement in recent years for fear of alienating his core believers, his MAGA people who don't believe in the effectiveness of these vaccines. But he has signaled his support for other vaccines, including the polio vaccine, which he praised as the greatest thing. You know how his hyperbole he uses all the time, as the greatest thing that he was a big believer in. Well, President Trump, if you just spend a few minutes and study the facts and figures at the CDC on polio, you'll find out that polio was over 90% gone before the vaccine showed up. Just amazing. And they're right there in public information at the CDC. The Salk and Sabin vaccines come out in the mid-50s, and you look at the data, the mortality data for polio, morbidity and mortality data for polio in the early 50s, and by 50, 51, 52, it had dropped by over 90% nationwide in this country, 2 to 3 years before the vaccine showed up. So I'd like you to be a big believer, President Trump, but I want you to believe in the facts. Now, the COVID vaccines have been linked to a small risk of heart damage and Guillain-Barré syndrome, where the immune system attacks nerves, causing pain, fatigue, and numbness. I've talked about it before on my program. The first time I ever ran across Guillain-Barré was back when I was doing my undergrad. I was in my early 20s, very early 20s. And there was this poor fellow in the ICU, and he had a trach, and so he had a machine breathing for him. And because his chest was paralyzed, his arms are paralyzed, his legs very paralyzed. He couldn't move anywhere, couldn't feel anything. He could move his eyes, and that was about it. And I asked the nurse, for Pete's sake, what happened to this poor man? And she said, oh, he has Guillain-Barré. Well, we didn't have computers in the early 70s. We didn't have Google. We didn't have Siri. I mean, you could ask Siri today, what's Guillain-Barré? And you're going to get a week's worth of reading material. So I had to go look it up. And, of course, I couldn't spell it correctly. I finally went back to the nurse. And in the Merck manual and some other medical journals that were there in the operating room library, I was working as an orderly in the operating room. And I had my eyes on a health care career, you know, even before I got married. So I looked it up, and it's just terrible, terrible condition. So I went back to that nurse, who I had a particular affinity for because she would answer my questions. And I had a lot of questions. In fact, the head nurse for the operating room, I can still see her, told me, quit bothering the doctors. And when doctors were standing around prior to surgery, during surgery, after surgery, in the doctor's lounge, whatever, and I always had questions, constantly asking questions. And she would tell me, stop asking them so many questions, you're bothering them. But this nurse, I would ask her questions, she'd take time to answer me. And I said, well, where's this Guillain-Barré come from? She says, oh, it's just the flu vaccine. This is probably 1973, 74 at the Provo General Hospital. That's back before it became the regional hospital. And she said, just like I said, you know, is the sun up in the sky at 12 noon? Oh, yeah, of course the sun's up in the sky at 12 noon. That's how she answered the question. What causes Guillain-Barré? Oh, the flu vaccine. We all know that, the flu vaccine. How long ago was that? I mean, that's like 50 years ago. So anyway, other vaccines are known to cause Guillain-Barré, not the least of which is the COVID vaccine. A lot of people have the misunderstanding that a vaccine is a bottle of saline fluid with a bug in it, either a half-dead bug or a completely dead bug, and that you inject that into the body and the body builds an immunity to that bug. But I know you know better than that. And if you've been listening to my programs at K-Talk for 30 years now, I'm in my 31st year at K-Talk, you know darn well there's an entire cocktail of chemicals inside that thing to try to trick the immune system into doing something it doesn't normally do. The immune system normally goes through the procedures of cellular immunity and then humoral immunity. Now, there's different names for that. It's just that the cellular immunity is when you're exposed to some kind of an antigen, you know, like you're in a room and someone walks in there that's got the flu or a cold or whatever, and they're coughing and sneezing, and that stuff blows across the room. A good sneeze, they estimate, can be as much, the particulates could be ejecting from the throat at 300 miles an hour, incidentally. And a lot of that stuff, microscopic to your eyes, blowing across the room, and you breathe it in. And even in your attempts to stay away from somebody like that, you end up breathing that stuff in. And immediately, as soon as it gets into the mucosa, the sinus mucosa, the down into your throat, into your bronchus, or the bronchi, into the lung tissue, the mucosal linings of all this tissue just lined with white blood cells. Immediately goes into action to destroy the antigen because it's not self. It doesn't belong there. And when it's not self, it's going to be destroyed. And in the process of that, a signaling system takes place with the beta cells, another part of your immune system, to produce antibodies to what you've just been exposed to. And it takes a week to 2 weeks for antibodies to properly form. And if you are of reasonable health, once you're exposed to something like this, you don't suddenly get sick. You just, go on about your business. You're just fine. You can be around sick people. But without you being aware of it, at least in the sense of some sensory input that you're aware of, your immune system is already taking care of this automatically. It's all done. And now you have immunity to whatever it was they were blowing across the room. That's the way it's supposed to work. The way vaccines are working is they bypass the cellular immunity. They inject this stuff into the body to kind of jumpstart the immune system into forming antibodies unnaturally. And the problem with this is it disrupts the normal immune response inside the human body. And you can end up with antibodies against your own tissues instead of just the thing that you were injected with. And that's where all this autoimmunity, it's not where all this autoimmunity is coming from. All this autoimmunity is coming from something else, I could tell you, if I have time. But there's plenty of autoimmunity that comes from these vaccines. And it will attack the nervous system. It will attack the lungs. It'll attack the kidneys. It can attack the liver. It can attack the heart, the brain. And there is data from the VAERS, no, not VAERS, from the Vaccine Compensation Program. That's different than VAERS. Suggests that 14,000 people have filed claims for injury or death that was caused by the COVID vaccine as of December 2024, out of the 270 Americans who received at least one dose. Now, 14,000, this is just cases that the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program is going to look at. There's a lot they won't look at. Now, the data from the COVID vaccine injury program, of course, is terribly untrustworthy because it's widely acknowledged that vaccine injury reporting is severely undercounted. Some of the best sources I've seen is that if only 1% of all vaccine injuries are reported, the $4 billion paid out over this so far is just the tip of the iceberg. So Bobby Jr. is vowing to launch a real vaccine injury reporting system that actually works. And this is huge, of course, as he was interviewed by Laura Ingraham. She said, do you think the COVID vaccine was safe and the boosters were safe? A lot of people talk about the adverse effects. And he says one of the best answers I've ever heard on that question. We don't have good data on that. So, that's what a scientist says. Well, let's see the data. Well, I'm of the opinion that people who drive white cars have less accidents than people who drive black-colored cars, because black-colored cars blend more with the road or things around the side, other vehicles or whatever else, and that you don't see them quite as fast as you can see a white-painted car. How do you prove that? Well, we don't have good data on that. That's just my opinion. I mean, that's the data thing. So when Bobby Kennedy Jr., who is the poster child right now of cleaning up the vaccine industry to produce safe vaccines, which of course they claim they do anyway, when you got Bobby Kennedy coming out and in that position he's in, to actually pull the authorization permits for the COVID vaccines by Moderna and Pfizer so that they can't distribute them anymore, he's in a very powerful position. And he's asked, are these things causing severe side effects? Well, he knows darn well they are. But he says, we don't have good data on that. Well, Secretary Kennedy, would you take them? And you know what he said? I'm not taking away anyone's vaccines. If he says if you want them, you can have them. Because they tried to make sure he did not get into this position because he was anti-vax. And he said all along, I'm not anti-vax. I just want safe vaccines. He got vaccinated. He had his children vaccinated. 4 of them have severe allergy problems following the vaccinations, which in my opinion, in my pediatric portion of my practice, that's where these kids' allergies are coming from. I hardly ever take care of a child with allergies that didn't have some kind of a vaccine. Anyway, that's another story. So he says, I'm not taking away anybody's vaccines. I just want safe ones. And you would think with the Food and Drug Administration and the CDC that these policies would already be in effect, that before a vaccine could hit the market, it should have rather extensive safety studies. Well, the studies that they do with most vaccines comprise more effectiveness than anything else. And it usually takes years and years and years to get a new vaccine in the marketplace. Sans safety studies. Well, these things shot out at warp speed, and isn't that what they were doing? Operation Warp Speed? To get these vaccines out in 2021? No, 2017, excuse me. No, excuse me. 2020 and then into 2021 when Biden finally got in there. So Dr. Paul Offit, who I have, as I've said many times, debated for a half an hour myself on national radio, a so-called vaccines expert at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, told the dailymail.com when they approached him that the vaccines are not dangerous. Well, he has, last count, 14 patented vaccines of his own. So, of course, they're not dangerous. He said this, the vaccines have been given to billions of people at this point, and there were large prospective placebo-controlled studies that didn't show these effects. Now, what you might want to take a look at is Dr. Naomi Wolf's paper called the Pfizer Papers, Pfizer's Crimes Against Humanity, where she publishes information that Dr. Paul Offit ought to take a look at. As the vaccines were rolled out, not everyone got them at once, and this staggering would tell you if something is a problem that was not picked up in the clinical trials. We picked up myocarditis during this. We even picked up Guillain-Barré, which has a rate after vaccination of about 8 in a million. We would have easily picked up excess deaths and purported links to cancer if this was true, but we haven't picked this up. That's Dr. Offit. So the CDC showed that 45% of adults over 65 who got the most recent COVID booster, while 23% of those over 18 have received it. And the preliminary data shows that 651 people died from COVID in the week of February 1, below the 939 deaths that were linked to flu in the same week. And around 25,000 people were dying from COVID at the peak of the pandemic in November of 2020, before the vaccines were ever rolled out. So in his new role as head of the Department of Human Services, Kennedy has power over the CDC panel that decides the immunization schedule for children and adults. What the heck? Sorry about that. Something's playing in the background here. All right. Anyway, there are several states that are considering bans. Tennessee, Iowa, Washington, interestingly enough, Montana, and Idaho. And the lawmakers are bringing the rules that have raised the fears that vaccines could integrate into human DNA, They're claiming that that's a conspiracy theory not backed by evidence, but there are plenty of reports coming out now, published research reports showing, in fact, it does get into human DNA. And that is so significant that there's no way in the world the manufacturers of these vaccines couldn't have known that ahead of time. Then you start getting into some real conspiratorial stuff. But at his Senate confirmation hearing, RFK Jr. said he didn't know whether COVID vaccines worked or not. Because they asked him, do COVID vaccines work? And he said, I don't know. We don't have a good surveillance system. So, you know, the Democratic members of that panel were sitting there waiting for him to say, no, they don't work. And then that would have been enough for them to deny his nomination. They had enough to deny it anyway, simply because he was picked by Trump. That would be enough of a reason to deny his position. But he gave a different answer than they were expecting. I don't know. We don't have a good surveillance system. Now, if you ask, and why is that? Because VAERS, the vaccine adverse reaction reporting system, some of the most reliable sources for that information says about 1% of the cases actually get reported there, because it takes about 30 minutes for a case to, in order to report a case to VAERS, takes about 30 minutes to fill out everything that has to be filled out to go with that report. So here we are 4 years later. Excess mortality is at a high, all-time high. Heart attacks in children are now commonplace. What about these kids that are having heart problems who didn't get the vax? We're having an increase in adolescent cardiopathology of children who did not get the vax. Does that mean the vax is free and clear then of any kind of negative assertion? No, we know that these vaccines shed. That it's not just the COVID vaccines that shed. We know that all vaccines shed. Some of the best information we have on that came out in the 50s, the 1950s, following the polio vaccines. And people were told, stay away from any sick children after you got the polio vaccine for at least 2 to 3 weeks. I wonder what they knew back then that they'd seem to deny today. Well, these news outlets are just utterly shameless. One moment they're highlighting the side effects of the vaccines, and next they're attacking anyone who tries to protect people from those very risks or help address the lingering harm. So obviously they don't genuinely care about people. It's all about making profit and preserving the status quo so that pharmaceutical industry will continue to use those organs to advertise, and they don't get lawsuits, and they create enough stir in the public mindset that people will go and read that screed in order to satisfy their thirst for the thrill that comes from reading about death and disease. All right, I want to move into another subject, and you've heard me talk about seed oils endlessly. I have been focusing on that with my patients lately, last 2-3 years, in the midst of all of the COVID stuff, because more and more we are seeing people who do not drink alcohol, do not smoke, that are actually rather health-minded, but are starting to have serious chronic pathologies related to the heart. And a lot of them are active exercise-oriented people not just, couch potatoes. And so every decade has a new food enemy. First it was fat, and then it was sugar, and now seed oils are under fire that are blamed for causing obesity and chronic disease. And it's almost impossible to avoid these seed oils. They're everywhere. There's salad dressings, fast food, protein bars. They are even in baby formula. And critics are claiming, I'm one of them, that they're harmful, while supporters say that they're safe, they're affordable, and in some cases they claim they're even good for you. However, the truth is a little more nuanced than that. I mean, the debate is often oversimplified. I mean, even the term seed oil is misleading, lumping together oils that have been part of traditional diets for centuries with these new modern created large-scale food production type oils. And at its core, the controversy isn't just about whether seed oils are good or bad, it's about how they're processed and how they're consumed. Now, if you've been following health trends or you've been listening to my shows whenever we could get them up, you've probably heard claims that seed oils are toxic and they should be avoided. Well, what are they? I mean, why are they considered harmful? Well, in the most basic definition of seed oil is the oil that comes out of a seed. I mean, that might seem harmless because olive oil comes from olives. Coconut oil comes from coconuts. But not all seed oils are the same, of course. Some, like sesame and flaxseed oil, have been integral to traditional diets for centuries and extracted through natural cold press methods that preserves their nutrients and their antioxidants. However, the others that are highly processed, industrial seed oils like soybean oil, corn oil, canola, sunflower, safflower, cottonseed, grapeseed, rice bran, they're all mass-produced through high heat extraction and then chemical refining. And manufacturers frequently use solvents like hexane to extract the maximum amount of oil. So these oils are then refined, they're bleached, they're deodorized, giving them the RBD, the label RBD, refined, bleached, and deodorized. And the process makes them neutral in taste, longer shelf life, but it removes beneficial compounds like vitamin E, it shows up in almost all oils, and antioxidants. And many of these industrial seed oils that I just mentioned, soybean, corn, canola, sunflower, safflower, cottonseed, grapeseed, and rice bran, were never intended for human consumption. Canola oil began as rapeseed oil, primarily used as a machine lubricant until the Canadian scientists modified it in the 1970s to get the toxic compounds out. Then the name itself, a blend of course, Canada and oil, that's where canola comes from, was a marketing invention. Vegetable oil is another misleading term because these seeds are not vegetables, but it makes them sound healthier. Now, Kate Shanahan, a Cornell-trained physician scientist specializing in dietary fats, and I've read a lot of her stuff, explains that industrial seed oils were not developed with nutrition in mind. She said that the crude oil from these seeds is inedible. Soy and canola were not bred for nutrition. They were bred for high yields and industrial durability. Most of the soy that's grown in the United States isn't intended for human consumption at all, because according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, more than 70% of U.S. soybeans are in animal feed, while another 5% ends up in biodiesel. And what remains is primarily refined as soybean oil, a product that has stripped out of it most of any of the nutritional benefit it had to begin with. And additionally, more than 90% of American soy is genetically modified to withstand the herbicides like glyphosate, allowing farms to spray entire fields without harming the crop. And this high-intensity farming, combined with heavy industrial processing, results in oil that is far removed from its original form. And unlike traditional oils like olive or sesame, which retain their natural antioxidants, the industrial seed oils require extensive refining to become stable on the shelf. And so what works for machines doesn't always work for humans. When you go down the section of the grocery store where these oils are on the shelf, and in Harmon's, in the one store I go to, it's lit. It's lit. There's light. And it always made me wonder why they have these oils backlit. Well, duh. It finally dawned on me. They have these things backlit so that you can see the clarity of the oil. Absolutely clean as it can possibly be. Because some oils aren't necessarily that clean. This is why a lot of chefs and a lot of fast food restaurants and even Michelin level restaurants like canola oil because it's tasteless. And so when they do fry something, the natural flavor of the food comes through in the final product because it doesn't pick up any flavor residue from the oil. Well, the problem is by the time that oil gets to a stage where it's perfect to fry your food in, not only are the most important nutrients having already removed from the oil has been altered in a form that your body has a very hard time dealing with. Now, for decades, scientists have debated the role of all the different kinds of fats as far as cardiology is concerned. Research was suggesting that replacing saturated fats that you find in butter and red meat with the polyunsaturated, the PUFAs from seed oils, might offer some cardiovascular benefits. Well, the research, I'm quoting from Matthew Nagra, a naturopathic doctor, says the research on seed oils is consistently positive. Numerous meta-analyses of randomized, controlled trials have demonstrated that replacing saturated fat with seed oils, rich in polyunsaturated fats, can lower the risk of cardiovascular disease, America's top killer, without any clear detriment. Well, and then large-scale studies support this claim. A 2021 study of more than 500,000 people found that those who replaced saturated fats with oils like canola, corn, and olive had a lower risk of heart disease and early death. The author of the study said, "Our findings support shifting the intake from solid fats to non-hydrogenated vegetable oils for cardiometabolic health and longevity." And then solid fats, of course, would be like butter and lard. So a 2025 Journal of the American Medical Association Internal Medicine study reinforced all these findings, showing that people who ate more plant-based oils, such as olive and soybean and canola, lived longer and had lower heart disease and cancer rates. Meanwhile, those who ate butter had a higher risk of early death. And so the researchers estimated that swapping butter for plant oils would reduce overall mortality by 17%, including a 17% drop in cancer deaths. And because of this growing evidence, the American Heart Association continues to recommend seed oils as a part of their heart-healthy diet. Well, not everyone agrees with the American Heart Association's endorsement of seed oils. Dr. Vinay Prasad out of the University of California says, "The study is of very low quality. It lumps extra virgin olive oil with soybean and safflower, which is ridiculous." He also criticized the study's methodology, arguing that it fails to accurately measure butter consumption and instead relies on a very imprecise estimation method, and this kind of nutritional epidemiology fuels dogma rather than providing clarity. And then beyond concerns about research methods, the critics of these oils arguing that the real issue with seed oil is oxidation. because refining seed oils more resistant to the whole idea of refining them is to make them resistant to spoilage, which allows them to last longer on the store shelf. But once they're exposed to heat or air or light, especially during cooking, then their chemical structure breaks down. And unlike traditional oils, such as olive or sesame, which naturally contains antioxidants that help prevent degradation, the industrial seed oils lose these stabilizing compounds during processing, and as a result, they're much more vulnerable to oxidation, a process that creates byproducts like aldehydes and free radicals. And these things simply damage cells. And there's an increasing study now that's showing when these chemical compounds get into the bloodstream, they are actually attacking the walls of the arteries. So your body lays down bandages called cholesterol and calcium. Your body uses cholesterol to deal with wounds internally inside the body. And so they see cholesterol as a part of what is blocking the arteries of the heart. And then cholesterol gets the blame when cholesterol was sent there as an ambulance to deal with the intima, the interlining of the heart arteries that are being damaged by the presence of these chemicals. Your body sends cholesterol there to cover it up so that it can heal. Now, not all experts are saying that oxidation is the problem. It's just that the idea of overly processing foods with these oils. And if there's one thing both critics and defenders of seed oils agreed on, cheap, abundant, heavily subsidized seed oils are a pillar of the modern food industry. And so the government, our government, through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, dumps billions of dollars in supporting crops like soybean and corn and cottonseed to make their oils more affordable than alternatives like olive or avocado, which two oils are far more healthier than these standard oils. But when you're a farmer and somebody comes to you from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and says, if you'll stop growing these potatoes and put in soybeans, you never have to worry about the soybean market. You know, beans, you know, in the Chicago Board of Trade. As far as futures are concerned, it's called beans. And what they mean by beans, they mean soybeans. And the price of soybeans, of course, fluctuates. So anytime you're a farmer and you're raising a particular type of animal, or you're raising a particular type of vegetable or plant, and it's in a market that fluctuates, you know, it's like shooting dice. You're taking a chance. But if the government is standing behind you and guaranteeing you, we'll pay you this much per bushel of beans. If the market will pay better, fine. But we guarantee you'll make at least this much. Which for a lot of the farmers, they said, well, that's a lot easier than what I've been doing. I guess I'll go that route. Now, soybeans dominate the market, accounting for about 90% of U.S. oilseed production. And the soybean industry received over $1.6 billion in subsidies, helping them to keep production high and the cost low. Government support doesn't just make seed oils cheap for home cooks. It makes them the backbone, and here's the problem, of ultra-processed foods, which now make up nearly 60% of the American diet. Now, I was asked the other day, how do you define an ultra-processed food as opposed to a processed food? I think the example I gave was a potato. A potato, white or sweet, whatever, that comes out of the ground and scrubbed really good and thrown in the oven and cooked until, you know, it's ready to eat, and cut open and just slathered with grass-pastured butter, sea salt, fresh ground black pepper, or chives, or whatever else you might put in there, bacon bits. Not bacon bits, but bacon bits you made yourself from nitrite-free bacon. Absolutely delicious. I remember, I don't know if it's a decade ago, 2 decades ago, there were some fast food places that specialized in baked potatoes. And all the possible things that you could do with a baked potato that a couple of decades earlier people were doing with banana splits. I remember banana split bars back in the 1970s down in Provo. You get your banana, you got your tray, and then there's like 50 different items of stuff you can put on your banana split. And then you would pay for it by the weight. And I remember that happening with baked potatoes. Some restaurants would have a baked potato bar. And you could go do whatever you wanted with that baked potato. And that's Mother Nature's food. That's Mother Nature made the potato, you baked it. So as far as I'm concerned, that's the base, the ground level of food in the sense of processing. Your processing was to cook it, make it soft, cover it with butter. Butter is something Mother Nature made indirectly through cows. A baked potato, Mother Nature made indirectly through your oven, but it's still level 1. Now, level 2, in the sense of how would you turn a potato into a processed potato? Well, if you took that potato and you baked it and scooped out all the potato and mixed it with mayonnaise and some other flavors, mayonnaise, probably soybean-based mayonnaise, then you put it back in the skin and cover it with a little bit of cheese and bake it. So you have what's called a twice-baked potato. Delicious as they are, they now have soybean oil in them. And that's a processed food. Now, how do you go from a processed food to an ultra-processed food? Well, what about a potato chip? You take a raw potato and you slice it thin, like a razor blade thin, and you drop it into canola oil, probably, maybe soybean, but most likely canola oil. It fries for, 90 seconds or less, whatever. It's picked up out, and then it's covered with some kind of salt or some flavoring, and then it ends up in a bag. That's still stage 1 processing, because when you look at that potato chip, you can see that it came from a potato. Now, what's ultra processed? Well, corn puff stuff that's made out of corn. Remember, 90% of the corn in our food supply is all genetically modified. Only 10% of corn isn't. So you start off with genetically modified corn, and it's turned into a mash. Some of it's going to go to whiskey, but the other part of it, the mash, is going to be mixed with different kinds of flavorings, and then it's going to go through an extrusion to end up in a bag that's got a picture of a tiger on the front of it and doused with fake cheese that, I have to admit, very, very flavorful. But that's an ultra-processed food because it no way in the world represents the corn that it came from. And they'll do the same thing with corn in the sense of an ultra-processed would be corn chips. That's different than a potato chip. Potato chip's been sliced, fried in oil, but it still looks like, you could tell it's a potato chip because you can see the potato tissue there in the potato chip. Corn chips is totally different. You take the corn to the point where it no longer looks like corn at all, and you create this pasty material, and it goes through a cutting die, and it looks like a corn chip, and it ends up being fried, or in some cases baked, which is better, and it ends up in a bag, with certain flavors on it, and you take it home and you dip your salsa with it and you eat it. The salsa is still grade 1 because as long as it's not cooked, if you have the raw salsa, you got the tomatoes in there, and you've got your little tiny, a little bit of maybe jalapeno and a little bit of onion, maybe a little bit of green pepper, and some various spices, and that's still grade 1 processing, even though the chip now at this point is grade 3, the way I grade foods. Now, I'm saying all of this to get back to the point where a lot of these studies are saying as much as 60% of the food that we eat in America is ultra-processed food. What about a hot dog? And in a bun, a white flour bun. Of course, that bun doesn't represent wheat in any form whatsoever in its mother form. That a bun is ultra-processed. What about the hot dog? Well, it may be 100% beef. It may be chicken. It may be turkey. It may be pork. There are fillers in there. And you read the label and you see what those fillers are. In some cases, some of the fillers don't even have to show up on the food label. The food labeling laws allow that to happen. Who's going to take hot dogs off the market? You might as well stop Christmas. And so meat, the longer it is around before it's eaten, removed from the animal that it came from, will get darker and darker and darker as the residue of what blood is left oxidizes. And so in order to keep it looking fresh, they put sodium nitrite in there. And in some cases, it will say no sodium nitrite added, but when you read the label, it has celery salt. Well, celery salt has a lot of nitrites in it. Mother Nature put those nitrites in that celery salt for some reason. But when you put sodium nitrite, like on bacon, it keeps the bacon looking fresh. But sodium nitrite is linked as a carcinogen for bowel cancer. Is bacon an ultra-processed food? It depends on how it's made, how it's been processed. You get that pork belly, and you slice it up in these super thin slices that come out of a package of bacon, and you mix it with all these other chemicals. It's now a processed food. And it's so much easier to eat food like that, isn't it? Instead of having to actually agree with some or spend the time it would take for a family of 4, maybe a family of 6, 4 kids, a family of 6, 2 parents. The time it would take to feed the family of 6 good level 1 Mother Nature made foods, how much time would that take? It would be a full-time job for someone just to shop for that stuff and then to produce 3 meals a day out of it would be a full-time job. What was the name of the lady in the Brady Bunch who was as much a part of the family as the kids were? Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to remember it, and you know who I'm talking about. And she always had an apron on, and she was almost always in the kitchen, sometimes other part of the house. And I remember thinking, what a difference that would make. What a difference that would make for some family or whatever if you had somebody like that out shopping at farmers markets, out shopping in the organic parts of the store, and then actually taking the time to procure hard winter wheat with 21% protein content, bring it back, have stone ground wheat flour in the afternoon, and by dinner time, fresh baked whole grain, whole wheat bread. Incidentally, one of the best cures for constipation, mind you. Sitting there on the table, hot out of the oven, butter at almost every station on the table, from grass-pastured butter, glasses of whole milk or spring water or something other than processed fluids like soft drinks. Did Mother Nature make soft drinks? Did Mother Nature make protein drinks? Did Mother Nature make Monster and all these different kinds of energy drinks? Of course not. That's not in her economy to produce stuff like that. That's also ultra-processed foods. So when you start to think, when I see numbers like, and I thought it was an exaggerated number, that 60% of the American diet is comprised of ultra-processed foods, I thought, that's a little high. But the more I thought about it, what we drink, what we have for breakfast, your breakfast cereal is ultra-processed. And as I've often said, breakfast cereal is just junk food. There's hardly anything left in there. And then they spray it with synthetic vitamins so they can say it at least has some food content or some good content to it. And then the poor kids with school lunch, ultra-processed foods. And then the candy. Mother Nature didn't make M&Ms. I think Mother Nature made Butterfingers. But I don't think Mother Nature made the rest of the candies that we eat. That's ultra-processed foods. And then for dinner, with the economic situation as it is in this country, you know, it takes two incomes anymore to get the job done. And then who has time to cook? And then either mom or dad or the partner or whatever else we want to call them, whoever gets home first, usually gets something started in the kitchen, and it usually comes out of a box, a bag, or a can, mixed with some water, put on the stove. I mean, who doesn't like Kraft mac and cheese with sliced up hot dogs in it? I remember that getting occasionally as I grew up as a teenager. Now, if you got that occasionally, I wouldn't have any problem with that. But when it becomes one of the staples of our foods, and then canned or bottled applesauce to go with it, frozen vegetables that are thrown in hot water for a few minutes to warm them up, put on a plate on a plate with some kind of fish or beef or pork or poultry or something else that was frozen and warmed up in the oven, you end up with a lot of processed foods in your diet. And these processed foods, two things happen. In the processing, the nutrients are removed from the processing of the food simply by the cooking. And then things are added to it like these seed oils. So I was talking to, well, I guess it's probably back as far as Christmas, a teenager that was in the office with their parent. And in the privacy of a treatment room, we're talking about these kinds of things because the girl had a lot of acne. So the mother was concerned about it. Of course, the teenage daughter was very concerned about it. And I started talking about these oils. I said, you get these oils out of your diet, the acne will go away. No. Yeah. Because these oils are messing up your hormonal system. And you're getting an overproduction of testosterone when you should be having a stable level of estrogen. You get rid of these oils. Well, what oils? I said, anyway, to get to the important part of the story, I said, I want you to go through this. I don't know that she ever did because I never saw her again. But I said, I want you to go to the supermarket, and I don't care what section of the store you're in, whether it's cereals or soups or salad dressings or condiments or breads or the bakery department or wherever else. Look at the ingredients and find something that doesn't have a seed oil in it. You will. They're there. But it's going to take a while to find it. And then when you find them that do not have these seed oils, find one without the seed oils that doesn't have sugar as the second ingredient, if not the first ingredient. And that's what the food industry has done to us, so that there are studies now that say by 2050, which is 25 years from now, 50% of Americans will be obese. 50%. Now, I say that in contrast to being in Valencia, Spain, September, October last year for my son's wedding. And the only people who were obese were American tourists. And that's no exaggeration. Everywhere I looked, and most of the Spaniards there in Valencia, right on the Mediterranean coast, their foods came from the farms the day before. When we were in restaurants, whether breakfast, lunch, or dinner, I thought we were eating at a farmer's market. That food was so fresh. And the fish, and I had fish with almost every meal, came right out of the Mediterranean the day or two before. And I thought, gosh, how could I combine all the great things, advantages of living in Utah, because I just love Utah. I was raised back east in Washington, D.C. I came out here to go to school when I found the dry climate that Utah offers, and the mountains, and the lakes, and the rivers, and the desert, and just all the getaway places. I found a new home. But we are removed from the ocean, and we are removed from fresh vegetables and fruit unless you go to the farmer's market. And how could I combine the nutrition lifestyle of Valencian Spaniards with the great living conditions of Utah? And I'm still trying to do that. But these seed oils, they're cheap, they're abundant, they're heavily subsidized, and they are the pillar of the modern food industry. And then along with the oils, you've got the refined grains, you've got added sugars, and the seed oils form the foundation of most processed foods. And the use of these oils enhance the texture, extends shelf life, and boosts flavor at a low cost because of all of the other little chemicals that are thrown in there. And so everything from breakfast cereals to frozen dinners. How do you avoid this stuff? A 32-ounce, on average, a 32-ounce bottle of canola oil costs about $5.79. The same amount of extra virgin olive oil is about $14, more than 2.5 times. And so when you are a food manufacturer, you want to try and keep those food costs down as low as you can for as long as you can. And with olive oil, it has a flavor to it. The really good olive oils are green colored, and they have a little bite on your tongue when you taste them. Seed oils, neutral in flavor, shelf stable, just the food manufacturer's dream. They can large craft, Post, the Nestle, the big food manufacturers, bring in these oils in railroad cars, and they can sit there for weeks because whatever makes an oil go bad has been removed from these oils. Shanahan, who I have her book, I have one of her books. She says that seed oils account for 20 to 30% of the average American's daily calorie intake. 20 to 30% from seed oils. And because seed oils aren't tracked as a category, it's difficult to really measure this stuff. So, you know, if ultra-processed foods were made with another oil, like butter, or beef tallow, or lard, or coconut fat, these foods would not suddenly become health foods, because there's still a lot of processing that's going on. So, a question I'm often asked is, well, what do I cook with? If I have to get rid of my corn oil, if I have to get rid of my Crisco. Crisco is one of the worst. You know, Crisco was originally gear lubricant. It's over 100 years ago when Crisco showed up. And they were using it in New York in textile manufacturing. They used Crisco to lubricate the wheels turning inside the looms for garment manufacturing in the garment industry of New York. And then somebody said, gee, I wonder if we just threw this in our cookie dough, what that would do. Well, I know I'm being ridiculous, but it is ridiculous because of where Crisco came from. So rather than fixating on eliminating oils altogether, a lot of the experts are saying just get rid of the ultra-processed foods and choose the high-quality fats when you're cooking at home. I mean, if you want to improve your health by cutting back on seed oils, the best way is just eat fewer ultra-processed foods. When you look at the food, did Mother Nature make this? Or as Dr. Jack says, is this just one step away from what Mother Nature made rather than 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? If you could cut back to that, you'd be doing your body and your family a wonderful thing. Because this stuff is everywhere, if you just cut back on the ultra-processed foods, you're cutting back tremendously on these oils. And then there's several other things you're cutting back on if you cut back on processed food, ultra-processed foods. Less sugar, less refined grain, and less bad sodium. What's bad sodium? Well, good sodium, good salt, sea salt. If it's sea salt, I have no problem with it. If it's in the salt, when it rains, it pours, with a little girl with an umbrella, you need to avoid that stuff. There's too much sodium chloride, and not the other chlorides that need to go with it. So if you want to make better choices in the kitchen, you want to use stable, minimally processed oils that are less prone to oxidation. And they don't have a high smoke temperature. They have lower smoke temperatures, so you have to cook them at lower temperatures. Avocado oil, it's high in monounsaturated fats. It's stable for higher heats. You have extra virgin olive oil, which is rich in antioxidants, which is perfect for just drizzling over your food or very, very light cooking. Butter and ghee, naturally stable for I fry my eggs, and if I don't have any bacon fat available, I fry my pastured eggs in pastured butter. Does a good job. Coconut oils, high in saturated fats, makes it oxidation resistant. You know that coconut has a higher level of saturated fat than even bacon. I think you know that. The highest, if I remember correctly, the highest of Mother Nature's foods that has the highest saturated fat content is coconut. And you didn't see heart attack and stroke showing up in the Polynesian Islands, where coconuts thrive, until white bread and sugar showed up. Oils best used cold. Flaxseed, which is very high in omega-3, best for dressings. Walnut oil is rich in antioxidants, flavorful in salads. And sesame oil, it's aromatic, has an interesting flavor to it, and it's moderately heat stable. And so what are the crazy 8, the deadly 8, the nasty 8, seed oils. I forget, there's a title for it. I forget what it is. This is the list. Soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, sunflower, safflower. Safflower is worse than canola, mind you. Grapeseed and rice bran oil. Now, some of these come in cold-pressed forms, but they're far less common than the mass-produced, highly processed counterparts. Is canola oil healthy? Yeah. Squeezed right out of the canola plant. Canola oil is very rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Canola oil is a very healthy oil as long as all you did was squeeze it out of the plant. Maybe a little filtering so that the only thing coming through the filter is the oil. What about soybean oil and all of the anti-soil propaganda, not propaganda, the anti-soy warnings that are out there? There's no soy protein in the soybean oil. Soybean oil is totally different than soybean isolate or soy isolate or soy protein. So the bottom line, the most important thing about these oils is how you consume them. A little drizzle of organic, minimally processed canola oil that you have to keep in the fridge so it doesn't spoil, drizzled over a little homemade salad, is not the same thing as eating French fries fried in a fast food restaurant in canola oil. And when you rely on ultra-processed foods that are filled with these cheap oils and sugar and additives, that's where the problem lies. And for the most part, the best way to improve their diet isn't so much to worry about every little drop of those 8 oils I mentioned. It's to stop eating ultra-processed foods. I can't think of an ultra-processed food that doesn't have one of these oils in it. Because I don't want to be found blaming Mother Nature, who made these oils, and not the foods that they're in. It's the foods that I blame, not the oil. And what happened to that oil once it was squeezed from the plant, through the processing it went through before it ended up in the big 25, 45-pound containers that end up in the back end of a fast food restaurant that get scooped into the fryers. Now it's no longer something Mother Nature made. You know what? I probably hit this point way, way too heavy. So I want to move on from here. I want to, we got about 40 minutes left. I want to hit the bird flu outlook that's going on constantly around us, and I want to try to hit statins if I have time. But we are, now you're hearing more about the bird flu all the time now. But the bird flu has been around for years. And the H5N1 version's been around for decades. So despite the change in leadership of the agencies who overlook this kind of stuff, primarily Bobby Kennedy Jr., and boy, what a job he must have ahead of him. The government is still continuing the strategy of culling millions of birds to help stop spreading the disease. So there was an article in the Epoch Times just a week or so ago that I thought was really interesting, that the culling is continuing because there's no better option available. Well, there's Mother Nature's option. The avian influenza, and I'll get to that, the avian influenza or bird flu has been around since 2014 in larger numbers. And at that time, they were just simply stamping out a strategy to help stop the spread of bird flu. And the experience led to a formal bird flu response being rolled out in 2017. And that plan, which is still being followed, is the United States' preferred and primary strategy for dealing with bird flu outbreaks. And so during the outbreak of 2014, 70% of bird flu cases were spread from farm to farm, according to the United States Department of Agriculture. And a farm-to-farm transmission occurs when a worker or a piece of farm equipment moving from one farm to another carries some part of the disease and then spreads to the birds. Now, Carol Cardona, one of the nation's foremost experts on avian influenza, said the U.S. egg industry learned from its experiences, significantly improved its biosecurity practices to reduce farm-to-farm transmission. So farm-to-farm transmission was down to 15% in 2023. And Cardona, who's a professor in the Department of Veterinary and Biological Sciences at the University of Minnesota, said the disease has mutated since 2015 and is being spread to farms either by wild birds or potentially domestic and wild mammals that carry the disease into the poultry houses. And she said the disease is on its way to becoming endemic or regularly occurring among wild birds. Something endemic as opposed to epidemic. Epidemic is everywhere. Endemic is something that's always there in certain regions. So the disease, of course, has led to a crisis in the U.S. egg industry. And the declining supply of eggs due to the loss of so many viable egg-laying hens and hens that have not yet reached maturity has caused the price of eggs, to go through the ceiling. So on February 28th, a month ago, the latest USDA summary pegged the current average wholesale price of a dozen of eggs at $8. Now, Dr. Robert Malone, and you all know him, I've quoted him many times. He's become very prominent. He was unknown 5 years ago, but through COVID became very well known. A vaccine pioneer, known for his skepticism of the U.S. public health establishment approach to COVID-19. Said he agreed with Cardona's assessment that the disease is becoming endemic. He said culling, and this is interesting, he said culling is basically wasting resources. Killing these chickens is just wasting. He says it's not doing anything anymore. So when something repeatedly isn't working, you probably ought to think through another policy that makes sense. Sure. Now the price of eggs, combined with the country's already elevated cost of living, is spurring some action that's going on in the state of Washington. Now, President Trump has directed the USDA to take steps to lower these egg prices as quickly as possible. During his speech to the joint session of Congress earlier this month, you remember that, Trump said President Joe Biden especially let the price of eggs get out of control. And then he said the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, inherited a total mess from the previous administration. So they are proposing alternatives to culling, which Malone has suggested that farmers get this. See if this makes any sense. See if when you hear this, if it makes any sense to you. When your poultry house is attacked by the avian flu virus, let it run its course through the poultry house. Suppose you got 500,000 chickens in however many houses that takes to do that. And all of a sudden you've got a few dead birds. According to policies established earlier, back in 2014, under Obama, you kill every bird in that house to stop its spread. Dr. Malone is saying, well, wait a second. Let it run its course. Because Who died from COVID? Do you remember what population in American society was most susceptible to COVID and subsequently died? Yeah, the comorbidity people, those who had kidney disease, those who had severe diabetes, those who had liver disease, those who had severe cardiovascular problems, those who had immune problems, those who had advanced cancer. These are the people who are most susceptible to dying from COVID. Interestingly enough, that's the same population group in America who are most susceptible to dying of flu. Just a little aside. Now, Dr. Malone is saying, when you get a few sick birds in the these concentration camps for chickens, that Mother Nature never intended these chickens to be treated this way, what is going to happen to the immune system of these chickens that are not allowed outside to run free in the sunshine, to eat bugs, to eat grass, to eat whatever chickens eat when they're running out loose? What happens to their immune system? What happens to a family that the kids spend all their time gaming? The parents are locked into Masked Singer or some of these other programs, and they stop getting out in the sunshine, and they stop exercising in the sense of just going for a nice 20, 30-minute walk every day, that eat ultra-processed foods, that eat soy-based foods, genetically modified corn-based foods. They're loaded up with seed oils, dyes, mold inhibitors, flavor extenders. What happens to that family over time compared to a family that's out in the sunshine all the time? Well, I know, I'm laboring a point, and I know you know the answer. Well, let's just put them chickens in a house that they don't belong in cages they don't belong in. Oh, no, they're not caged. They get to run free inside these big buildings. Yeah, well, as they bump into a bunch of other chickens with every step that they take. That's not the way for them to live either. What happens to the immune systems in these birds? Yeah, you got the picture. So Malone says, let it run its course. Which chickens are going to die? The sickest, of course, the ones who are most immune compromised. Chickens have immune systems. They're not mammals, but they still have immune systems. And then the birds that survive breed them because they've developed an immunity to the avian flu virus. I still, in my search at 74 years old now, finding somewhere where Mother Nature was wrong, except for the mosquito. I have a very hard time blaming Mother Nature. But then, a patient of mine who works for the game, the Utah game people, said if you get rid of mosquitoes, you'll get rid of the bats, because mosquitoes are the #1 food of bats. Oh, well, I don't want to do that. All right, well, thanks for pointing that out to me. Anyway, just that aside. So what would happen if you started breeding chickens that had immunity to the avian flu virus? So Malone also said that the industry should investigate the so-called heritage breeds of chickens who have demonstrated a greater resistance to avian flu and breed those animals. So a senior USDA official told the Epoch Times that the agency remains open to alternative approaches but hasn't found anything yet that works. Well, I think you should try Dr. Malone's idea. Let the damn disease pass through, which is what Mother Nature has done with the human species since the dawn of time. Every now and then, these things show up, they pass through the community. The sickest among us succumb to it, the strongest go on, and they breed a stronger version of mankind. Now, that may sound cold and cruel and indifferent to the suffering of the sick, but that's kind of how nature works. Nature can be brutal. So this latest measles thing that's passing through our communities, you notice they don't talk about how many died. They just talk about how many people got measles. Big scare, get your measles vaccine, get your measles vaccine. What was this thing, my son? I have a son who was a nurse practitioner. I need to bring up his this text that he sent me the other day. That was, I can't quote it, but it's really good. It was a picture, I think it was on TikTok. Measles was declared eliminated from the United States in 2000 by the World Health Organization due to successive vaccination efforts. It's back now in 18 states. Why? And then the suggested answer is anti-vaxxers. That's just nonsense. Just like polio, you can show that polio was 90% eliminated before the polio vaccines ever showed up. Same thing with measles. Measles was almost completely gone before the measles vaccine ever showed up. And then the measles vaccine in the MMR, there's some very reliable studies coming out showing the connection with the MMR and autism. Why'd I bring this up? Well, they want to start vaccinating the chickens. Now, I can still remember on television the pictures of back at the beginning of the COVID vaccines when they came out there at the end of 2020 into 2021, and the long lines of people lining up for their COVID vaccine. How would you vaccinate a chicken farm of 2 or 3 million chickens? Would you put it in their food? Would you put it in their water? Would somebody be running around with a needle, injecting these poor things? Now, the officials said that avian flu is an extremely virulent disease for birds. The 2012 American College of Veterinary Pathologists concluded that the disease's H5 and H7 subtypes cause severe systemic disease in chickens with nearly 100% mortality. And the senior USDA official said there's little evidence that any alternative to culling will keep the birds alive. Well, culling certainly won't keep them alive. And as far as the USDA is aware, all previous attempts to isolate a healthy portion has ended up with the healthy ones becoming infected and dying. Well, I'm not so sure of that. So there's the issue of indemnity payments. Suppose you have a farm of 2 million chickens and someone from the USDA comes in and says, we're going to kill one of these little beggars. You're going to have to dig a deep hole out there in your farm somewhere and bury them. And you say, wait a second. This is my livelihood. Do you know how many eggs these 2 million chickens produce every day? What's going to happen to my egg business, let alone the price of eggs when my competitor gets knocked out of business too? All right. In testimony on February 26 before the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, an Indiana-based egg producer spoke at length about all of this, and we want to be indemnified. So this is the stipulation of the Animal Health Protection Act. The act grants the Secretary of the USDA the power to order destruction of sick animals and to pay indemnities assessed at fair market value to their owners. So the guidelines state that the USDA will provide compensation, known as indemnity payments, to owners of animals that are required to be destroyed. If farmers do not cull their birds after the detection of bird flu, they're not entitled to receive money from the government to recover their losses and assist in restarting their operations. And since the start of the current outbreak, which is about November of last year, Wisner, who was interviewed in this article, says the federal indemnity payments have totaled $1.25 billion. So they're trying to find some way now to get rid of more birds quicker and then compensate the owners. Now, the long-term questions. Enhancing farm biosecurity is a key plank of the new USDA playbook for bird flu. That almost sounds scary. The agency started in late February. It'll dedicate $500 million to gold standard biosecurity measures for all U.S. poultry producers. Now, does that mean they're going to do blood tests on these birds? I mean, the owners of these farms? You know how we were testing people for COVID? Are they going to do that with the chickens? I still like Dr. Malone's idea. Let it pass through the chicken house. Yeah, some of them are going to die. But the farmers who have chickens free range, pastured, running all over the hillside, it'd be interesting to see what percentage of those birds died. Same thing happens in the cattle industry, where you have free-range cattle eating grass and flowers and herbs like they're supposed to, and not soy or corn silage, that have been in the sunshine all day long, as opposed to cattle that are kept in very close confinement and fed 2 or 3 times a day, watered heavily, go through those little chutes that limit their movement so they get a nice big old hypodermic in their butt for hormones, for antibiotics, and whatever else they shoot them up with. What was the death rate if something passed through a ranch like that as opposed to free-ranged animals? What happens in the animals that are exposed to sunlight that the animals that are in confined quarters don't get? And how powerful is that one incredible vitamin that comes from sun exposure in the health of that animal? What happens in the health of growing children who rediscover the fun of baseball and flag football and army or whatever else they would play outside all day long in the sunshine during summer break, as opposed to kids when they first wake up in the morning and fill their bellies with breakfast cereal and pasteurized milk, spend the rest of the day gaming or TikToking. Yeah, vitamin D. How vital is vitamin D? They have some discussion going on now to reclassify vitamin D not as a vitamin, but as a hormone. Because it's steroid-based. The chemical structure of vitamin D has a steroid in the middle of it. almost every system in the human body requires the presence of vitamin D. And so even though you have chickens covered with feathers, and you have cattle covered with hair, and you have fish covered with the ocean water, the oils of these animals, the fats of these animals, are rich in vitamin D and vitamin A if they're exposed to sunlight. The animals that are confined, we always talk about how bad it is that these confined, commercially raised animals are loaded with all kinds of hormones and antibiotics and anti-pesticides and all other kinds of things, and then fed, of all things, soy-based meal. Ugh. So when some studies came out a couple of decades ago about the incidence of bowel cancer by consuming red meat, they never specified the source of that red meat, except that it came from cattle. Was it confined, commercially raised cattle, or was it cattle that were free range, that had high levels of vitamin D in the fat of that animal? Vitamin A and vitamin D are only animal, you only get them from animal products. Vitamin A and vitamin D do not exist in a natural form outside of animals, and they're fat soluble. They're in the fat of the animal. I don't want to go in that direction. I think I hammered that last week enough. Vitamin D, vitamin D, vitamin D. We know that pastured chickens have higher vitamin D and A content in their egg yolk than commercially raised chickens with the white eggs. How'd that vitamin D get in there in an animal covered with feathers? How did the vitamin D get in the raw milk of dairy cattle out in the sunshine, covered with hair, as opposed to we humans who, within about 30 to 40 minutes of exposure of our skin to a June sunshine, can make a whole month's worth of vitamin D in a matter of a few minutes? Because they're out there in the sun all day long. And those penetrating ultraviolet B rays still get through. You know how you can get, if you're out in the sun all day in the summertime with a cloudy overcast sky, you can still get sunburned. Because it's not the heat of the sun that burns you. It's the ultraviolet spectrum that causes sunburn. Not the heat, not the infrared that you feel the warmth, when you feel the warmth of the sun in the summertime. That's not what's giving you the sunburn. It's the ultraviolet rays that are giving you the sunburn that you don't feel until you're burned. Well, they get through the hair and they get through the feathers. When you live by the rules of Mother Nature, life is so different in the sense of immune strength, in the sense of bone density, in the sense of purity of the blood and organ function. So when I'm dealing with somebody, and I was dealing with these lovely people yesterday, really good salt of the earth people. And one has been using Ozempic, semaglutide, and the other one has been using semaglutide but moved to tirzepatide because it seemed to work better. One of them is happy with the 40 pounds of weight the person lost, and the other one is just an emotional mess and kind of upside down metabolically and stopped losing weight. And now is having all kinds of problems. That she's not the first. We have other patients we're taking care of, just messed up horribly with Ozempic or Wegovy or Mounjaro. And because you're fooling around with Mother Nature. Mother Nature never intended for you to find drugs to block the GLP-1 receptor sites in your gastric system. But because of the ability for you to go on eating the way you want to eat and still lose weight, the attraction of that is just overwhelming. You know, and because, you know, it's the example I used to give with smoking. With every cigarette you smoke, and you smoke it right down to the end, there will be about a teaspoon of blood that will hemorrhage in the alveoli of the lungs from that irritation. A teaspoon of blood, your lungs are pretty big. You got millions and millions of these alveoli where the gas exchange takes place in the lungs. A teaspoon of blood, what's that? And a cigarette will temporarily paralyze the cilia that line the lungs and line the bronchi that move fluid up out of the lungs so that you cough it up and either spit it out or swallow it or whatever else you do. Those things get paralyzed so the fluid builds up in the bottom of the lungs. But you don't know that unless you studied that or you've learned about it from some other source. So when you smoke your cigarette and you get your nicotine high from it, that's all that matters. And some people are so relying on that nicotine high and the dopamine that's released that if I don't get a cigarette right now, I'm just going to kill somebody. Now, if that teaspoon of blood that hemorrhages from the alveoli in the lungs were to leak out of the eyeballs with every cigarette they took, we would probably not have a cigarette problem in this country, even as greatly reduced as it is. And with vaping and what the oils in that vape do to the lining of the lungs, if that residue came out of the eyeballs or leaked from our eardrums every time we use that stuff, we'd stop doing it. And so when we take drugs like semaglutide and tirzepatide, and there's a couple more starting to show up, because the market just demands that I continue to eat the way I want to eat and lose weight. Because I know the way I've been eating put on the weight. And I just love my carbs, and I love my seed oils, and I love my energy drinks. And I love my desserts, and I don't want to give them up. Is there a drug I can take that will help me skip over that critical decision in my life? Yeah, semaglutide. It started off as diabetes drugs, but they started to notice people were losing weight because it was paralyzing the digestive system. So even though you were eating food, you were getting a lot of undigested stuff moving through the system, a lot of it backing up because you lost your appetites, so you didn't eat as much. And now there's hell to pay. If I'm getting preachy, I apologize. I have a tendency to get that way because I go through this every day with patients. So does Hannah, so does Trudy, when people are asking questions about this at the counter. It's one of the reasons why we created Jack's Packs, so that there is heart support without having to use drugs. There's immune support without having to use drugs. There's digestion support without having to use drugs. There's female support without having to use drugs. And we know that Digest Forte that we have, made by MediHerb, is a great stimulator for the GLP-1 receptor sites in your gastric system. So when people have asked me, well, is there an alternative to these things? Well, number one, eat Mother Nature's diet, but if you're not going to do that, you might want to try Digest Forte. It has some herbs in there that are known that stimulate the GLP-1 receptor sites. But that's the reason why we created these Jack Packs. And I'm putting another one together for the spike protein answer, and another one for immediate cardiopulmonary relief. And what's it coming from? It's coming from food. Food concentrates. What are her side effects? None that I've been able to find. So, I didn't want to leave out the vitamin D aspect regarding avian flu. I think if, I haven't seen the entirety of Dr. Malone's interview, but I would be very surprised if he didn't say, move the damn chickens out into the sunlight. Oh, we can't do that because one of them might get away and fly over to another farm 5 miles down the road and infect all those chickens. Man, that is how Mother Nature works. You're not going to stop a virus from escaping a population. That's the nature of the beast. They're everywhere. Bacteria everywhere. We now know from some virology studies that just in the local air around you, all of the exosomes, all the viruses, the viral elements floating around, number greater than the stars in the heavens. Ten to the 31st power. The number 10 with 31 zeros. That's how many viruses are in the air. How many viruses are in the ground? How many viruses are in the ocean? Try and get away from that. 10 to the 31st power. More than all the stars in the known universe. So what do you do about it? Well, you follow Mother Nature's laws, not the least of which is get some decent sun exposure. All right, we're coming up here towards the end. I wanted to get into statins as well because there's some more stuff going on that, gee, it's just, when I have a patient concerned about their cholesterol numbers, and they tell me, you know, it's like 185, 190, which to me is way too low. And I said, are you taking a statin? Oh, yes. And there's 3 different ones now that are the more common ones that are out there. Every now and then a new one will show up, and but they have muscle pain. Or they're having sleep difficulties. They're having some kind of digestion problem. They're having some kind of hormonal problem. And one of the worst things is they're starting to have memory problems. And so I tell them about a book that's called Lipitor, The Thief of Memory. And I suggested that they read it, get a copy of it, and start reading it. It's by Dr. Dwayne Graveline, who is a cardiologist was for a while, to the astronauts. And it's very interesting. He started getting higher blood pressure, higher levels of cholesterol, which naturally occurs as we get older, mind you. And he turned himself over to one of the other astronaut cardiologists to monitor his condition. Doctors will do that. Medical doctors will turn to another medical doctor to monitor their condition, prescribe whatever they're going to prescribe. And so he was prescribed Lipitor. And there was a time, I don't think it still is the case, but there was a time when Lipitor was the #1 selling drug on the face of the planet. If it still is, it's shortly going to be overtaken by semaglutide, or one of the knockoffs that will show up here before too long to try and push it out of the #1 spot. And so he began to notice over time that he was starting to lose his memory. And it got to the point where he felt like it was threatening his ability to perform as a medical doctor, as a cardiologist to these astronauts. And interestingly enough, they will not let anybody go up in space with low cholesterol. They have to have what modern day medical boards would consider too high of a cholesterol. They will absolutely require them to have higher levels of cholesterol before they go up into space. And so the only thing he could figure out that he had done recently was the use of one of the statins. And so when he stopped it, over the next couple of months, his memory returned. His ability to remember and recall things returned. So that's when he wrote the book, Lipitor, Thief of Memory. Now, how does that happen? Well, statins force the liver to stop making cholesterol. Your body needs a certain amount of cholesterol every day to perform its functions. All your cells are lined. All your cells are lined with cholesterol. And so your liver will make cholesterol if cholesterol isn't in your diet. But what these drugs do is they force the liver to not make cholesterol. And then if you're put on a low cholesterol diet, which of course is going to be, you're not going to have any dairy products or meat products, which is where you find vitamin A and vitamin D, you're going to have other kinds of problems showing up as vitamin malnutrition, let alone the fact that you're not making enough cholesterol. And then that's where a lot of these problems start showing up. Well, I'm getting some texts that are telling me the volume just isn't that good. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be able to do this. This is Wednesday, which means I'm not going to be doing anything till Monday of next week, except I hope to be able to start making some short streaming content that deals with the daily news of information that's coming in every day. I know I keep saying that, I just haven't done it yet. But hopefully I will before too long. I am going to stop this recording here so I can save it at K-Talk under today's program. And then I am going to finish out the stream. Those of you who've been listening on the stream, I really appreciate if you can just pass the word along, refer, review, subscribe, whatever it is you do here, to continue to build the audience. I would really appreciate that. So I'm going to end the stream, and I will be back again the first of next week, catching up on what's going on around the planet. But thank you for those on the stream.